were out of order. Did you do that on purpose?
Yes, please.
Did you do that on purpose?
Yes, please.
Is that your idea of a joke? It's not fun. Yeah, he gets to hide behind the door. Yeah. This is awkward. Thank you, sir. The next piece I'm going to read is called Lines. Lines. David was nervous, looking down at the ground, and the procession of ants dangerously close to his feet. He began to talk, though it was not his strong point, so as not to let the ants get to his head. "Here they are," he said, "my favorite." David pointed to the lion sitting quietly by a large rock as he felt the ants already start up his leg, tickling on their way up, brushing against his leg hair. The other male lion sat by the water, wetting his paw. "They don't do much," she said. David laughed. "Not here, they don't." His hands were sweating profusely, his eyelids blinking at an alarming rate, making things appear to move faster, in uneven rhythms, in fragments, unorganized. He was highly conscious of his own posture, his unshaved beard, the weight of his belly, and the smell of old rum coming from his breath as he turned his glance towards the large animal who was now yawning, and then at his date, who was standing next to him, fidgeting with her phone. In fact, he had never imagined that she would agree to see him. The night they met was at a pub called Fitzgerald's, and David ended up hunched over his beer with potato chips on his collar, spitting some unintelligible ramble about obsessions and getting old. But she had agreed, out of curiosity maybe, or a similar kind of boredom, and now they found themselves in this awkward silence none of them seemed able to rupture. He was still sweating, his shirt damp against his skin, his body unresponsive to his commands for it to calm down. It rebelled against him for all the damage he had done to it, and so his body helped his fear to vividly create the sensation of the ants increasing, marching around his calves and thighs. His heart rate accelerated. He could feel them going in through his pores and wanted to step back. A dozen predatory ants were now on his chest, under his arms, but at the precise moment his date's soft elbow had brushed against his arm. She was trying to stand closer, closer. He hardly recognized this. The warmth of the wool sweater confused him as the ants crept on his back and neck and colonized in his scalp. When David was 7 years old, on a mandatory school field trip to the zoo, his juice box, showcasing a happy surfer on the cover, burst and leaked inside his backpack and onto the back of his shorts. His classmates laughed at the wet spot on his pants, and the high sugar content attracted ants the way blood attracts sharks in the ocean. They gathered slowly around him in a fierce spiral, eating at his hair, his mind. Every inch of skin became enveloped with tiny moving red dots. His classmates watched his fear turn to panic, turn to reality, turn to hysteria. His skin blistered, ached, and his eyes dried up. He began to cry at the imagined army of ants all over him. The teacher, a middle-aged woman, distracted and plain, was not aware that little David was in fact experiencing a very real hallucination. She only stood shocked as David's face scrunched up, sinking into itself, doing strange contortions. And because of the severity of the screams, and David flinging his limbs in all directions, somebody called for help, and a man in a zoo ambulance, which was nothing but a golf cart with a first aid kit, drove up with a mock siren. The teacher covered her ears with her hands from the unbearably high-pitched sound and pointed to the hysteric child with her elbow. The man in the ambulance was wearing explorer-type shorts, beige and just above the knee, and understood quickly that there was no stopping David's assertion that he was being eaten alive. All little David could say was, "The ants, get them off." Thus, the explorer man was forced, in order to quiet little David and keep him from tearing off his own face, to remove the child's shirt and hose him down, providing him later with a complimentary zebra exhibit shirt with a smiling zebra in a leather jacket that was one size too small and a pinkish color. The class laughed, and when it was over and the man with shorts drove away in his cart, the class continued walking through the fake zoo countries. David's throat was scratchy from holding back the crying stuff inside, his hair dripping wet, his eyes burned from the tears when they stopped in front of the lion's cage, and watched them as they circled from one edge of the cage to the other. He forgot himself for a moment. He admired their great faces, golden and fierce, and their yellowish eyes that carried something like pain in them, and in the sun their coats were bright and inviting. There was humanness to them, that look of subdued intensity, of wanting to say something. Then in a swift pounce, one of the lions pawed at his companion and tore at the flesh. The baffled lion could do nothing but try to defend himself with clumsy, powerful jabs of the paw. There was no judgment in their violence, no distinction. It was a simple act of being. A dark red started coming out of the smaller lion. The muscles were radiant in the sun, their teeth white, and the sound that rumbled through the glass made little David confused. The class was told that was the way they played together, because lions are social animals. Now at 40, he'd made it a habit to visit the zoo regularly, and for hours he'd sit in front of the lions wondering what it was he'd really seen that day when he was 7. "Are you all right there?" he heard a voice. His date, oh yes, his date, was looking at him curiously. He could hardly see her. The ants were all over him now, and it hurt to move. He could feel them between his toes and crawling inside his fingernails and his nostrils. He was 7 years old again, unable to explain, unable to speak, but he couldn't cry this time. The lions in front of them stirred, noticing for the first time the odd pair of eyes that watched them from behind the glass. David tried opening his mouth to reply to her, to say something complimentary as one should, maybe about her eyes or her soft sweater, but something came over him, and when he opened his mouth, instead of words, there was a roar, a dark sound from deep in his bowels, an unleashed desire or raw hunger, and his teeth, showing in the light, closed in on her unsuspecting shoulder bone. Then his teeth sank into her, into the sweater, but they were much too weak to cause any real damage. Perhaps from years of smoking, eating vast amounts of sugar and never brushing. So instead of piercing the flesh, he rested his teeth there on her shoulder, his mouth wide open, and wanting not to move, to remain in a perpetual state of hunger, away from boredom. It was a kind of survival. He did not think about the ants then.
Wait, that's the end?
I'm sorry?
That's the end? That's how you're going to end it?
Yeah, that's how I'm going to end it. I mean, if you must know, 2 hours later, David woke up at the zoo, awoken by an old man with a broom poking at him. And the guy told him, "Hey, it's closing time. Get out of here." So David got up, brushed the dust from his suit, wiped his bloody nose, and took the bus home. Is that good enough for you, right?
Why didn't you put that in your story? It ends with him biting her. That's like Twilight. I don't like vampires. A vampire story? Is it about vampires?
He's not a vampire.
Well, what happened?
Well, I don't know. I mean, David went back home. You know, he had his regular daily life. Woke up in the morning, had a cup of coffee by the window, went to work, dragged his feet at work, took as many smoke breaks as he could, then went to the bar after work and had a few drinks. He liked the pint, as they say. He was an Englishman who lived in Britain. That's where I met him, actually. That's where I met David. We became really good friends. And one of the last times I saw David, he told me that he'd been in the hospital for a while because a couple of punk kids had broken a bottle over his head while he was at the pub. David didn't like goodbyes, so when I was getting ready to leave England, he disappeared for 2 weeks and I've never seen him again.
Do you know what he's doing now?
Well, a few days ago I received a letter. I received a letter from a woman named Anne, who claimed to be his mother. She explained how we had never met, but she had heard plenty of me from David, his half-Mexican, half-American friend, who was somehow in England for way too long. And then she also explained how David was walking to work one morning. It was winter, and he slipped on some ice and hit his head. And that was the end of that. And after that, I could finally say goodbye to him. Because you see, sometimes it's just necessary to kill your own friends.
What they didn't tell you in the introduction is Madi is a first-year student in the MFA program, and I see there's some more MFAistas here.